I think that one of the most important jobs of a state legislator is budget prioritization, and I know Jason's aware of that. So it's not a matter of whether a particular area of expenditure is important or not in an absolute sense, but in a relative sense. It's all about prioritization. And I feel that corrections are important. I think that they've become more prominent with mandatory sentencing regulations, laws that have been passed. My preference, and I think that the preference of the constituents in District 54 and in the state of Oregon, is to rather prevent crime and the need for expenditures, corrections expenditures to begin with. So going back to the idea of everything is a matter of priority, and expenditures in a relative context rather than just an absolute one. I'd prefer to see expenditures on the side of crime prevention, social services, the kinds of social infrastructure and public safety expenditure that prevents crime and the need for corrections expenditure to begin with, rather than subsequently.
There's a correlation between what we've done in public safety for the last several years. I don't know going how far back, we're probably well into the early 90s, mid to early 90s. It probably corresponds with mandatory sentencing. I'm not sure that there's a cause and effect relationship between the two, but certainly could be. Reduction in crime, especially violent crime, has occurred along with an increase in the prison population. And this is not an area where I have been focused from a policy perspective. I've focused on the areas that I said I would in my campaign, and I also, coincidentally, not coincidentally, because I asked to be on the committees, in the areas that I said I would focus, I got on policy committees that have jurisdiction over those subject matters, which did not include judiciary, which is, of course, has a lot, or Ways and Means, which has, judiciary has policy jurisdiction, and Ways and Means has budget jurisdiction over corrections, among other things. So with that said, the corrections / public safety budget, like the rest of the state budget, like the rest of the costs of providing services that we need in the state, are growing at an unsustainable rate. And what that has forced us to do is to get into a zero-sum game. And I agree with what Nathan said. It's a question of prioritization. It's also a question of how do we stop, how do we change the system of delivering services so that it's not growing at an unsustainable rate of cost on a year-over-year basis. Clearly, corrections has become a bigger and bigger part of the budget as the prison population has increased and as the cost of providing incarceration has increased. So there are a number of ways to address that. One is to look at mandatory sentencing and to look at whether or not the prison population is appropriate given the benefit in terms of public safety that results from that and the drop in violent crime. I don't know whether it is or not. I've heard arguments on both sides, frankly, and I think it could probably, there could be a little bit of both. In other words, there's probably people who are incarcerated who are not a threat to society, and so we're paying a lot to imprison them instead of getting them out and getting them back into society and becoming productive. And that's obviously not a desirable outcome. But on the other hand, you want to be very, very cautious about changing policy in a way that reduces prison population and puts people back out on the streets who could be violent offenders and hurt innocent citizens.
In a minute. I'm kind of cautious about mandatory sentencing. I don't want to thwart the will of the voters and so forth, but there are consequences to mandatory sentencing, an obvious impact on incarcerations and corrections expenditures. So, and I also don't know that we should legislate necessarily entirely areas that correctional professionals, justice professionals, and so forth have more expertise on than state legislators. And then I would also say that I need to learn more about this, but it seems like there's more opportunity for efficiencies sort of cross-jurisdictional as far as prisons and so forth. It seems like there are some prisons, local or state, that have capacity and others that are overflowing. I want to be careful about mixing different populations and so forth, because I know there are probably considerations there. But it always strikes me as kind of crazy that we're under capacity, at least from what I read, in some areas, and over capacity in others.
Would you like